We're talking about the year 1241, a time when a storm from the east, the Mongol Empire, was about to collide with the armored heart of Christendom. This is the story of how a seemingly outnumbered Mongol force faced down the might of European chivalry and in just a few days changed the course of history. How did 20,000 horsemen devastate an army of up to 40,000 knights and soldiers? Let's find out. The year is 1241. For decades, the Mongol Empire, forged by the legendary Genghis Khan, had been expanding at a terrifying pace. They had conquered vast swaths of Asia and the Rus principalities, their reputation for speed, strategy, and sheer brutality preceding them. Now, their sights were set on the heart of Europe. The Great Khan, Gedai, had sanctioned a massive two-pronged invasion targeting the kingdoms of Poland and Hungary. Leading the northern pincer of this attack were two of Genghis Khan's own grandsons, Baydar and Kaydan. They commanded a force of roughly Tetumans, the Mongol equivalent of a division, totaling around 20,000 warriors. Now, 20,000 might not sound like a world-ending army, but this was no ordinary force. These were the inheritors of the most sophisticated and disciplined military machine on the planet. Their goal was not just to conquer, but to sow chaos, to prevent the Polish and their allies from reinforcing the main target, Hungary, which was being invaded by a much larger Mongol army under the General Subutai. As the Mongols swept into Poland, they left a trail of destruction. Cities like Sandomierz and Krakow were sacked and burned. The alarm bells were ringing across Christendom. This wasn't just another border skirmish, this was an existential threat. In response to this terrifying invasion, a coalition of European forces began to assemble. The man who stepped up to lead this desperate defense was Henry II, Duke of Silesia, known to history as Henry the Pious. He was a respected and powerful ruler, and he began to rally a grand army. It was a true cross-section of medieval European power. At its core were the feigned knights, the armored titans of the feudal world. Among them were some of the most elite and feared warriors of the age, the Knights Templar and the Teutonic Knights, military orders born from the Crusades, sworn to defend Christendom. They were joined by Polish knights, Moravian nobles, and even a contingent of Bavarian miners known for their toughness. Estimates of Henry's total force vary, but most historians place it somewhere between 25,000 and 40,000 men. On paper, they significantly outnumbered the Mongol invaders. For Duke Henry and his allies, this was more than a battle for land or titles. It was seen as a holy war, a last stand for their faith and their way of life against the so-called devil-esque horsemen from the east. They were confident. They had numbers, they had heavy armor, and they were fighting on home turf. They gathered near the city of Legnika in a field that would become known as the Field of Good Men, preparing to deliver a decisive blow that would drive the invaders back into the steppes. What they didn't realize was that they were about to face an enemy unlike any they had ever encountered. The Mongols didn't play by the rules of European warfare. The fateful day was April 9th, 1241. As the sun rose over the fields near Legnika, the two armies faced each other. The European army was a spectacular sight, a forest of lances, gleaming plate armor, and colorful banners fluttering in the wind. Duke Henry arranged his forces in traditional European fashion, with his heavily armored knights forming the vanguard, ready for a decisive, earth-shattering charge. Behind them were the less armored infantry and crossbowmen. Their strategy was simple and proven, a massive, overwhelming cavalry charge to break the enemy's center and ride them down. Across the field, the Mongol army looked deceptively unimpressive. They were mostly light cavalry mounted on smaller, hardier ponies. They wore lighter armor, often leather or lamellar, and carried composite bows, sabers, and lances. They were not there to meet a charge head-on. They were there to execute a plan of masterful deception and psychological warfare. The battle began as Henry expected. He ordered his knights forward. The ground trembled as thousands of tons of horse and steel thundered across the field. The initial charge crashed into the Mongol front line. But instead of a solid line to break, the Mongols gave way. They feigned retreat. This was a classic Mongol tactic, the feigned flight, designed to do one thing: lure the enemy into a trap. The European knights, tasting what they believed was an easy victory, fell for it hook, line, and sinker. Believing the Mongols were breaking and running, their discipline shattered. The heavy cavalry charged forward in a disorganized pursuit, eager to claim glory and cut down the fleeing horsemen. They became strung out, separated from their slower-moving infantry support, their formations completely broken. This was the moment Baidar and Kaidan had been waiting for. Once the knights were drawn far enough into the open field, the trap was sprung. Suddenly, the fleeing Mongol wings wheeled around, reforming their lines on the flanks of the charging Europeans. From all sides, a storm of arrows rained down on the knights. The powerful Mongol composite bows could punch through chainmail and find the gaps in plate armor, wounding riders and, more importantly, their unarmored horses. Knights without their mounts were just slow-moving targets in heavy metal cans. To add to the chaos and confusion, the Mongols unleashed another weapon from their arsenal of psychological warfare. They used smoke screens. They lit fires on the battlefield, creating dense, acrid smoke that choked the Europeans, obscured their vision, and made it impossible for commanders to see what was happening or issue coherent orders. Panic began to set in. The triumphant charge had turned into a desperate, confused melee in a fog of smoke and arrows. Surrounded, isolated, and blinded, the elite of European chivalry were cut down. The Mongol light cavalry, agile and relentless, swarmed the disoriented knights. They darted in and out, firing arrows, striking with their sabers, and then disappearing back into the smoke. The heavily armored knights, exhausted and unable to form a defensive line, were systematically destroyed. Duke Henry the Pious fought bravely, but was eventually surrounded and killed. The Mongols, as was their custom to demoralize the enemy, cut off his head and paraded it on a spear. The battle was a complete and utter catastrophe for the European coalition. In just a matter of hours, an army of up to 40,000 men had been annihilated by a force half its size. The Mongols reportedly collected 9 large sacks of right ears from the fallen to count the dead. The Battle of Legnica was a brutal lesson in the superiority of Mongol strategy, mobility, and discipline over the brute force of European heavy cavalry. And yet, despite this crushing victory, the Mongols didn't press on into Germany. Why? Just 2 days after Legnica, on April 11th, the main Mongol army under Subutai won another staggering victory against the Hungarians at the Battle of Mohi. Europe lay wide open. But then, news arrived from the heart of the Mongol Empire. The Great Khan, Gedai, had died. According to Mongol law, all princes of the bloodline had to return to the capital, Karakorum, to elect a new Great Khan. So, Baidar, Kaidan, and the rest of the Mongol princes turned their horses around and began the long ride home. They left a devastated Eastern Europe in their wake, but their invasion of the continent's heartland was over. Europe was saved, not by its knights or its castles, but by the unexpected death of a distant emperor. The Battle of Legnica serves as a powerful reminder that in warfare, technology and brute strength are often no match for superior strategy, discipline, and the element of surprise. The Mongols proved that mobility and coordination could defeat a numerically superior but less flexible foe. It was a terrifying glimpse of a different way of war, one that Europe would not forget for centuries. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into history. What do you think would have happened if Gedai Khan hadn't died? Let us know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next historical adventure.